What if I told you we could use math to map out the probabilities of our lives? I don't mean like fortune telling, but actually modeling the real chances of getting sick, recovering, or even getting married. Well, it turns out we can, but there's a huge catch. To get it right, our models have to understand one fundamental truth. The rules of the game change as we get older. All right, let's just dive right in with a question that seems, pretty simple at first, but it actually blows the lid off a massive flaw in basic prediction models. So just think about it for a second. Who's more likely to be around in 10 years? Your gut instinct, my gut instinct, says the 25-year-old, right? Of course, they're younger, generally healthier. But what happens when we try to use a simple mathematical model to answer this? The result is, well, it's not what you'd expect at all. Get this. If you use a basic model that just assumes everyone has a constant risk of dying each year, it spits out a truly bizarre answer. It says that both the 25-year-old and the 60-year-old have the exact same 90.5% chance of surviving the next decade. Now that just can't be right. It completely fails the common sense test. And it's not just us saying that. The experts who actually build these models, the source material itself, they call this an absurd result. So that's our starting point. This simple model is fundamentally broken. It's missing a key ingredient about how reality actually works. So what's the missing piece of the puzzle? What's the secret sauce? It's the idea that probabilities aren't set in stone. The risks we face, the chances of things happening, they change as we age. And this leads us to a much, much more powerful way of looking at the world. See, that simple, broken model is what we call time-homogeneous. The best way to think about it is like a board game, where the rules are the same on turn 1 as they are on turn 100. But that's not life, is it? A much better approach is a time-inhomogeneous model. This is like a game where the rules can literally change on every single turn. Your age, how long you've been in the game, totally changes the odds. And that's the formal definition right there. A time-inhomogeneous process is just a fancy way of saying we're using a model that gets it. It understands that the chance of moving from one state to another, say from healthy to sick, depends entirely on when you start. The rules change over time, which is exactly how life actually works. Okay, so the concept makes perfect sense. But how in the world do you actually do the math for something where the rules are constantly shifting under your feet? You're going to need a pretty powerful mathematical engine to handle that. And that engine has a name, the Kolmogorov equations. Now, don't worry, we're not about to get into the weeds with a bunch of complex formulas. The really important takeaway here is just that these equations are the tools that allow us to work with models where the rules aren't fixed. Basically, these equations are what let us calculate the odds of something happening, even when that underlying risk, the transition rate, is a moving target that changes over time. This is the key that unlocks all the realistic modeling we're going to talk about. All right, so enough with the theory. Let's get to the fun part and see how all this comes together in some really fascinating real-world applications. This is where it all starts to feel a bit more personal. First up, we can build what's called a healthy, sick, dead model. It's a way to map the journey that, well, all of us take through different states of health over our entire lifetime. The model usually has 3 basic states: healthy, sick, and dead. You might move from healthy to sick. You could recover and go from sick back to healthy, or you could move from either of those states to the final one, dead. But the crucial part, the whole point, is that the probability of making any of those jumps changes as a person gets older. And getting this right is a huge deal for everything from public health policy to how insurance companies calculate their risks. And what's really cool is that this isn't just for health. You can apply the exact same logic to map out social journeys, like a person's marital status throughout their life. So in this case, the states are things like bachelor, married, widowed, divorced, and, of course, the absorbing state, dead. The model can calculate the odds of moving from, say, married to divorced at a certain age, or from widowed back to married. This gives researchers an incredibly powerful tool to understand big societal trends. Okay, so making our models time-dependent was a massive leap in making them realistic. But we can actually add one more layer of sophistication. What if the amount of time you've already spent in a particular state also changes the odds? Let's just think about that for a second. In the real world, if you're sick, is your chance of recovery really the same on day 5 as it is on day 50? Probably not. The duration of the illness itself seems pretty important, right? Well, there's a name for this concept, duration dependence. It basically means we're making our models even smarter by telling them that the probability of leaving a state can depend on how long you've already been there. So a standard time-inhomogeneous model says your recovery rate just depends on your age. That's good. But a duration-dependent model says it depends on your age and on how long you've been sick. This allows for a much more nuanced and realistic picture because it recognizes that your prognosis can change over the course of an illness. And the source material explains exactly why this extra step is so important. It says the simpler model has an undesirable feature because it assumes the length of your illness doesn't matter for your future. To remove that flaw and make the predictions really credible, you have to modify the model to include duration. So, we've gone on this journey from a simple, flawed model that gave us absurd answers, all the way to these incredibly sophisticated frameworks that can account for both our age and the duration of life events. They give us a powerful new lens to understand the probabilistic pathways of our lives. The big question that leaves us with is, what are they going to help us understand next?